Well, it's December 4th. I thought I'd tell a little story, but first I wanted to tell you that there's a little inversion going on here in Alaska right now. If you live up high, it's nice and warm. It's been around zero for the last 3 or 4 days. And down in the valleys, like in town or Fairbanks, it's like 20 or 25 below zero. So it's nice to live up a little higher. So anyway, this is a little story about my son and I were going sheep hunting. So we get to where we're going to go and unload the four-wheeler, cruise in a few miles, set up a base camp, and we start hunting. Well, my son, he's not real old at the time, and we just went slow, and we didn't set up a spike camp anywhere. We just had our base camp, so we'd take off each day from the base camp, and then by that evening, 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, we'd come back and to our base camp and eat, just hang out, till we went to sleep and get a good night, get some rest, and lay around, not get too worn out. And next day we'd take off again. And we'd search these valleys, different valleys. And I kept telling my son at the time, I said, man, we got to watch out for bears. There are bears everywhere down here. And about the third day, we were going up the drainage and stepped up in this little meadow, and there was 2 grizzly bears. And they just locked up like bird dogs. One of them even had his front leg reared up, like it was pointing almost. They just froze. And I just turned around. We did it and got back down the drainage, so it was nice and clear. We could see around ourselves and waited a few minutes. And them dang grizzly bears took off in front of us. We seen them ahead of us, and they were trying to get up in the drainage that we were wanting to go into to look for sheep. So I actually took took off running after him a little bit, and I took my t-shirt and I was waving it back and forth at him, and finally we got him to go the other way. So anyway, about after we walked for like 4, we didn't see any sheep. So it's like day 4. So the end of the day of day 4, we come back to the base camp. We're sitting around, and I happen to look up on the mountain, and I see this big old ram, and I seen him for like maybe 3 to 5 seconds. And that was it. Then he disappeared in the rock, but way up. And I don't know how far up he was, but let's just say, goodness, over a quarter of a mile higher than what we were. That's 440 yards. He was higher than that. So anyway, there was this one spot, I guess, where, I don't know, maybe it did slid at one time. There'd actually been, earthquakes in that area. You can see where those big cracks opened up in the mountains in different places, where the ground actually opened up. But anyway, there was this one spot, and we didn't name it. Now we have named places as we hunted before and fished or whatever, but this place, this particular spot on this mountain was called the Green Monster, and we didn't name it. Other people had named it. Okay. So the very next morning, we got up super early, and we took off up this Green Monster. Now, this Green Monster was steep enough that you had to use your hands and your feet. You just crawled up it, and I kept my son right ahead of me, so I could watch him. And if he was to fall, he would have, fall into my lap. But it wasn't as bad as you might think, But it took us a while to get up on top, and time we got up on top, I was sweating like a pig, and I was in pretty good shape too. I'd been shingling houses, and in some steep houses, every day, and so I see part of this sheep. So I tell my son, I said, well, stay right here, and I start crawling up, belly crawling up there a little bit closer, and I get up there a little bit closer, and it's like between a half and a 3/4 circled ram, not near big enough to shoot. And I motioned to my son to come up there, and he crawls up beside me, and we sat there and looked at that ram for probably, I don't know, maybe a minute or two. And just before, well, the ram smelled us. That's that smaller ram, and he takes off. But just before he takes off, there was the big ram that I had seen was behind him. But I couldn't see him from where I was at. But all I could see, I seen him where like he had his head down, grazing, and he picked his head up and turned to leave. And I seen that big arc of all that big, the top part of his curl of his horn, it come off his head and started to curl and come down. And that's all I seen. And we messed around there in that 3/4 ram. He ran down this, a canyon. Down this canyon, ran back up the other side, got even with us, laid out on a big flat, and got up on a big flat rock and just laid down and started sunning. And he wasn't 100 yards from us, but there was no way a human being could, you would have had to repelled to get down in there and climb to get back up there. You would have had to have a rope or something. There was no way a human could go where the sheep had went. So we get up, look around. Well, we don't see any other sheep, And the sheep that I see on top of its head, the top of its horn was gone. But there was a real heavy sheep trail that went in and out of this mountain. So we started following this sheep trail. And it was going in and out, like I said, the mountain. We didn't see anything. All of a sudden, we go out on one of them points, and then we could see back into the next circle, to the next point. And on the next point, there was like 7 or 8 big rams. And they were all together, and just as we were seeing them, they were going up and over that other ram that we had seen, I guess, had just got there to them or something. And those 7 or 8 rams were going up over the mountain, and we could only see them for like maybe 20, 30 seconds, maybe even longer than 30 seconds. But the sun was directly behind them. You couldn't even hardly see that they were white dall sheep because they looked dark because the sun was shining so hard from the other way. And to try to look at them, I tried to look at them, but you couldn't see nothing through the scope, like that. There's no place to get down and get a rest, And I never was that great at shooting off-handed, especially with the big old heavy rifle. And so they went on, out of sight. We went on up there, and there was a big salt lick right there. And we decided not to go back the way we had came, and we didn't want to go back down that mountain. Because like I said, it was so steep, we had to use our hands to get up it. So we started cutting it back down the mountain and across to come out over by where our base camp was, below it, but then we were going to walk up the trail to our base camp. Well, there where those sheep were in that salt lick, there was a little creek runs out. The sheep had came down and got some water too, besides digging into that salt lick, or mineral lick, whatever you want to call it, And everything was fine, and just really nice and beautiful. And we called it Sheep Creek. So then we started going down that Sheep Creek a little bit, and we started cutting across the tundra to go back down and around that mountain, and we come on to another creek. But just before we got to that creek, we got invaded by these flies. They weren't biting flies, but they were, I don't know what they call them, but they were just in our ears and our mouths and our noses. And at one point my son, I could just tell he was about ready to lose it, and I actually took my t-shirt and put it over his head and let him rest inside of my t-shirt for a few minutes just to get away from all the bugs before we continued on back around to our base camp. And we called that creek Bullshit Creek because of all the flies. But anyway, we made it back to the base camp. We never got a sheep. We went home, I think, the next day or something. But the sad part about it was that we never went back to up that green mountain, up in that area again. And from 4 or 5 miles away, about every time I went in there, I could see rams up on the face of that mountain. But when you get up there close, you can't see them any longer. Like once you get about 2 miles, you can't see it. You can't see that far up. And just like on a mountain where you can look up at a mountain, it just looks like it's a big stone mountain, just as dry, nothing there. And you can start walking up or going up a drainage, working your way up in there. And next thing you know, you'll find a waterfall and a pond or a little lake or something, up in the mountain, halfway up the mountain. And then all that water drains underground. And when you get to the bottom of the mountain, you don't even know there's any water around. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the story.